If you walked into an American kitchen in 1935 and looked in the larder, a good deal of what you found would be unfamiliar. Not exotic, the opposite of exotic. These were the plainest, most ordinary things in the country, eaten by everybody several times a week without comment. And most of them are now either gone entirely from American shops or have retreated to a specialist corner of one. I have spent years reading what those kitchens left behind: recipe cards, grocery ledgers, the advertisements in the back of magazines, the menus of ordinary restaurants. And the American diet in those pages is a genuinely different diet. 12 of those things today. The last one on this list is not a food at all. It is a condition that governed everything Americans ate for the whole of history until about 1960. And it has vanished so completely that most people now cannot imagine it. Let us begin. A word about why the American diet changed, because it is not the reason people usually give. It was not that tastes moved. Tastes generally follow supply rather than leading it. What changed was the supply chain: refrigerated transport, the interstate highway, industrial processing, and the supermarket, all arriving within about 30 years of each other. Once food could travel 1,000 miles cheaply and be stored indefinitely, the things that survived were the things that traveled and stored well. Everything else contracted to a region, or to a specialist, or disappeared. What follows is a list of things that lost that competition. Number 12. Mutton. Not lamb. Mutton, which is the meat of a mature sheep, and it is a considerably stronger and more distinctive thing. Americans ate a great deal of it. It was on restaurant menus routinely. It was served in institutions, and it was a standard part of the meat supply in most of the country. Two things ended it. Enormous numbers of American servicemen in the Second World War were fed poor quality mutton, badly cooked, in quantity, and came home with a permanent objection to it. And the sheep industry itself contracted sharply. Within a generation, mutton had essentially left the American table. Lamb remains in small quantities. Mutton is now genuinely difficult to buy in most of the United States, which would have astonished anybody shopping in 1935. Number 11. Salt pork. The foundation of an enormous amount of American cooking, and almost invisible now. It is pork, heavily salted, kept without refrigeration for long periods, and used in small quantities to give fat and flavor to nearly everything. Beans, greens, chowder, cornbread. It was less a dish than a background ingredient present in most of what a household cooked. It kept indefinitely, which was the entire point in a house without a refrigerator, and it was cheap. Refrigeration removed the necessity, and cooking fats and stock cubes took over the function. It survives regionally, particularly in the South, and is a specialist item nearly everywhere else. Number 10. Lard, as the default fat. Not an ingredient people thought about, simply what fat meant. It was rendered at home or bought in a pail, and it went into pastry, into frying, into biscuits and pie crusts, and pie crust made with lard is a genuinely different, and by most accounts, superior thing. Vegetable shortening had been advertised heavily since before the First World War, and margarine grew steadily, and by the middle of the century, lard had been substantially displaced in the American kitchen. It has come back a little in recent years among people who bake seriously, but as the default fat in an ordinary household, the thing that was simply in the kitchen without discussion, it is gone. Number 9. White margarine with a dye capsule. This is my favorite item on the list because it is an entirely artificial situation created by legislation. Margarine competed with butter, and the dairy states did not care for that. So a great many states passed laws prohibiting margarine from being sold colored yellow. So it was sold white, looking like lard, with a small capsule of yellow dye included in the package. The household kneaded the dye into the block by hand, in a bag, until it looked like butter. This was frequently a job given to children. Millions of American households did this, routinely, for decades. The coloring restrictions were lifted state by state, with the last of them going in the 60s. An entire domestic ritual performed nationwide, which existed only because of a law, and vanished completely the moment the law did. Number 8. Oysters as poor food. For most of the 19th century, and well into the 20th, oysters in America were cheap, abundant, and eaten by everybody in enormous quantities. Oyster cellars and stands were common in cities. They were sold from carts. They went into stews, into pies, into stuffing, and were eaten by the plateful by people with very little money. Then the beds were over-harvested and polluted, and the supply collapsed. What had been the cheapest protein in the coastal United States became scarce, and scarcity did what it always does to price. The same oyster in the same city moved from working-class staple to luxury item inside about 50 years without changing at all. Number 7. Rabbit. Widely eaten, widely available, and sold in ordinary butcher shops as a matter of course. It was cheap, it could be raised in a backyard hutch on scraps, and during the Depression it fed a great many households that could not afford anything else. Government campaigns actively encouraged raising them. It disappeared from the American diet with remarkable speed after the war. The usual explanations are the collapse in price of chicken, which became extraordinarily cheap through industrial production, and a change in how Americans thought about rabbits, which became pets rather than livestock. Whatever the cause, a meat that was in every butcher's window in 1935 is now a specialist order. Number 6. Head cheese and the rest of the animal. Not cheese, a jellied preparation made from the parts of a pig's head, set in its own gelatin, sliced cold. And with it the whole category: tongue, heart, kidney, tripe, sweetbreads, and the various preserved and jellied things made from the parts of an animal that are not the muscle cuts. These were normal. They were in every butcher's case. They were cheap, and a household that bought a whole or half animal used all of it because the alternative was waste. Rising incomes and the supermarket meat case ended it. When people could afford to buy only the cuts they preferred, they did, and the rest went into industrial processing where nobody had to look at it. Number 5. Regional apples. There were thousands of named apple varieties grown in the United States, and most of them were local. A county might have its own, propagated from a tree somebody found in a hedge 60 years earlier. They ripened at different times, they were good for different things, and a great many of them did not travel or keep at all, which was irrelevant when they were eaten within 10 miles of the tree. Commercial distribution selected hard for the opposite qualities. What survived were the varieties that ship well, store for months, and look consistent on a shelf. An enormous number of American apple varieties simply stopped being grown. Some have been recovered by enthusiasts working from old orchards. Most have not. Number 4. Milk with the cream on top. Delivered in glass, not homogenized, with a distinct layer of cream at the neck of the bottle that had to be shaken in or poured off. Households used that cream deliberately. It went into coffee, onto fruit, into cooking. In cold weather, the milk froze and pushed a column of cream up out of the bottle, which is a thing a great many Americans of a certain age remember seeing on the step. Homogenization distributed the fat evenly and permanently, and the supermarket ended the delivery. The milk is safer now and more consistent, and it does not go off in a day. What went is that a household received a thing that had visible parts to it and made decisions about them. Number 3. Boiled and steamed puddings. Suet puddings, steamed cakes, puddings boiled in a cloth, and the whole family of heavy sweet dishes cooked with prolonged wet heat. They were common in American kitchens well into the century, and they made sense in a kitchen with an unreliable oven, because a pot of boiling water is a much easier thing to control than a wood stove's oven temperature. The reliable domestic oven removed the reason for them. The baked cake won because it is faster and lighter, and the oven now did what it was told. They survive at Christmas in a few families and essentially nowhere else, and an entire technique of American cooking went with them. Number 2. Bread that was stale by tomorrow. Bread in 1935 was made without the preservatives and dough conditioners that came later, and a loaf was noticeably stale within a day and hard within 2, which is why American cooking has so many dishes built on stale bread. Bread pudding, stuffing, croutons, thickening for soups and sauces, frying it. None of those are recipes for using up bread. They are recipes that assume stale bread as a normal, expected household input. Industrial baking largely eliminated the problem, and the dishes remained without their reason. That is a small example of something that runs through this whole list. The technique outlives the condition that produced it, and then people forget there was ever a condition. Number 1. Not being able to eat things out of season. And here is the one I mentioned at the start. For the whole of human history until roughly the middle of the 20th century, and in America until the 50s and 60s, you ate what was available, where you were, at that time of year, and there was no alternative. No tomatoes in January, no strawberries except for a few weeks. fresh vegetables largely absent through late winter, which is why the preserved food mattered so much, and why the first of anything in spring was an event. That structured everything: the cooking, the preserving, the shape of the year, and the fact that a food had a season attached to it that everybody knew. Refrigerated shipping and global supply removed it almost entirely within about 30 years, which is on nearly every measure an improvement, and it is also the largest change in how human beings eat that has ever happened. The loss is small and specific. Nothing arrives anymore. There is no first strawberry, because there was never a last one. 12 then, and not one of them was considered interesting at the time. I am not going to tell you the food was better. A great deal of it was monotonous, some of it was genuinely unpleasant, and the winter diet in a northern household was poor by any standard. But it was particular. It came from somewhere close by, it changed through the year, and the household knew a great deal about where it had come from, because in many cases they had been there. That is what keeps turning up in the recipe cards. Not nostalgia, just a list of ordinary things that stopped being ordinary. I am Harlan Fenwick. The Almanac continues.